You feel that? Those are the cold winds of empty seats of every sporting arena in the world. You hear that? That is the silence from no fans cheering for their team. I find it shocking the grieving process the public is going through when you take their sports away. This became the real March Madness for me. Listen, I get it. Well, maybe I don't, but I can empathize and support the purpose of community and team spirit when it comes to sporting events. Personally, the endless running to my daughter's soccer games I don't miss. But from an outsider looking in, I always wanted to be part of whatever the feeling was that was evoked from thousands of people cheering for the same purpose. But you know what's even more maddening but glorious about this moment in this game we call life? The star players we find ourselves cheering for now are the unsung heroes. It's the grocery store workers, the talented voices from the regular Joe and Mary that we never knew existed. We put faces to the working moms and dads working in our healthcare systems, our restaurants, the post office. The unsung and the faceless have become heard and known. And think about it, these people are doing more than just putting a ball in a basket. I'll let you sit with that thought. One unsung hero that really shines and continues to take center stage in every company across this country is you, the internal communicator. It is our goal at the Internal Comms Pro Collective to get you to see you how we see you, how the world now sees you. You've been taken off the bench. You're not the water girl, the water boy anymore. You are the point guard, the buzzer beater, the game-winning shot under pressure, the one we are all cheering for, and I want you to feel this. Just listen now, as if you were the star player in the final game of the March Madness tournament. Can you imagine crowds by the thousands cheering you on? Just listen.
Kristen Campos, Senior Director for Mars Wrigley, and recently got promoted to VP Corporate Affairs for Mars Food North America. Just scored with 0.7 seconds left to go.
Oh, internal comms never tasted so sweet.
Oh my goodness, Nestle and Hershey are melting. Kelsey Cox, Senior Manager for Employee Comms, coming down the lane for JB Hunt.
Oh my goodness, pulls off the opening round shocker. Robbie, Kelsey gets her community to thank our nation's truck drivers for delivering critical supplies day and night.
That is amazing, Alex. She definitely is a true IABC and PRSA award winner this year. Christine Dwyer, Director of Communications and Public Relations at Ferguson Enterprises. Alex, how are you feeling about her this year?
Oh, you know, Robbie, Christine always nails the right tone with her employees, and she makes her team look so good. The director, the sharpshooter.
Alex, there's no question about it. Christine is one to watch this season. Alan Glass, starting at Director, Internal Communications and Communication Services at American Electric Power. He is the force behind employee engagement.
Here comes Alan, fires his resonating messages, and oh my goodness, during his overtime. Robbie, the Ohio State University must be proud of this alum, baby.
That's right, Alex. Nobody's message is as smooth as glass. Jonathan Adams, coming from behind for the win, using big data to engage Fidelity employees.
Wow, he was worth the investment.
Jonathan Adams coming up big for his team. Natalie Guzman scores, and now we're headed into the IT department. She's got their ear. It's a miracle.
Oh my goodness, she's innovating. The VP of Internal Comms for Fifth Third Bank is cashing in.
Alex, she'll be Player of the Year. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, maybe quarantine has completely gone to my head, but I'll be vulnerable. You now see how my weirdo brain works. But before we dove into today's episode, where I interview two CBS sports broadcasters, I needed you to feel your value, your power. For there's no empty stands or silence anymore when it comes to internal communicators. You're in full bloom now. You are center court, my friend. Okay, so let's dive into today's episode. When I recorded this, we were in the thick of college basketball season. Now, my fiance is a die-hard University of Dayton Flyer fan, so the UD games are always in our home. One particular evening, UD is playing LaSalle. Now, of course, I'm working on this podcast and I'm trying to figure out an easy ROI formula for internal communicators to use. And I hear the sports announcers during the game struggling to calculate some basketball stat on the fly. And one of the announcers made the comment that caused me to track them down and to interview them on today's show. The comment was something like, as communicators, we aren't good at math. Wanting to change that language was the impetus for me reaching out to Joel Godett and Mike O'Donnell. And you're going to love the play-by-play storytelling game plan that unfolded in our conversation. Grab your popcorn, get on the edge of your seat for this nail-biter of an episode. It is good till the last second.
Yeah, so my name is Joel Godett, and I'm, I guess, full-time the radio play-by-play voice at Ball State University, and then you'll also catch me doing college basketball on CBS Sports Network, and I've had the pleasure to cross paths in that line of work with Mike O'Donnell.
Well, very kind words from Joel, as always. I appreciate it, buddy. And my name is Mike O'Donnell. And college basketball analyst for CBS Sports and ESPN. I also work during the week at a boutique private equity firm in Orlando, and live and work based out of Orlando, Florida.
Well, Joel and Mike, I can't thank you enough for hopping on a call with me. I know we are just weeks away from kicking off March Madness. And I was connected to both of you when I was watching the University of Dayton versus LaSalle game, and you both were announcing it. And I remember you trying, and maybe you can refresh my memory, but you were trying to quickly add some stat or something in your head. And I don't know who said it, but Mike or one of you said, hey, we're communicators, we don't do math, or we're not good at math, or something like that. And so I, on a whim, thought I'm going to reach out because it's been our kind of personal passion here at Internal Comms Pro to empower communicators with math to calculate their ROI on their work. So do you guys remember that? Even saying that?
Yeah. Mike's the one that said it, but I'm the one that thinks it every day because I can't add on the fly, so I'll readily admit that.
Well, thanks for throwing me under the bus, Joel. I do appreciate that. And yes, I did say it. I believe actually what we were talking about was we hit a stat, and then one of the players was majoring in finance as well. And that's when you and I just I kind of brought it up because I'm just very comfortable in who I am as a person, and I know that for math is just not my initial strong suit, and which is insane to think that I guess I'm obviously working at a private equity firm, so hopefully
Right.
this doesn't get out there to our investors, but. That's why I work for people a lot smarter than me.
Well, I'd love to start by just hearing a little bit of both of your backstories, and how you fell into kind of sports broadcasting. So, Joel, why don't we start with you?
It gets as nerdy as I went to sports broadcasting camp in high school, and from there launched myself into like local media extraordinaire when I was 17 years old, and local papers and all that jazz, and public access TV, which led to college, where I went to Syracuse and did the broadcast thing at all the student radio stations and student media. And then one thing led to another, and kind of wound my way after college through minor league baseball for 5 seasons. That took me all up and down the East Coast, and then eventually to Ball State, where I am full time, and then some network TV work, obviously on top of that as well. But all throughout that, I'm an English and history guy through and through. Those are just the things that stuck with me. I am not a math and sciences guy, so hopefully that kind of lends itself a little bit to where you want to go here.
All right. And Mike, tell us a little bit about your history.
Well, I would be an astronaut if I was good at math, because I am obsessed with space and space exploration, but I can't do the math part. It's just my brain doesn't work like that. But I was
a basketball player almost my entire life. I played at NC State and UCF. I don't have the educational background that Joel has in terms of going to broadcasting camp. I didn't even know that. That's pretty cool. I didn't even know this existed, buddy. That's impressive.
Neither did I at the time.
But I grew up, memorizing SportsCenter as a kid. I was just a jock who just loved everything about sports. But I always had an interest in broadcasting, which was somewhat strange because even now I would say I still am. But back in elementary, middle school, high school, college, I was an extreme introvert. Sports was my way of really almost that's how I met essentially all my friends, my closest friends. That was my kind of outlet almost for communication. I was just a really quiet kid. And so then when I was done playing, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Like a lot of, sadly, like a lot of student athletes in college, regardless of the sport, you really don't, nobody ever really talks to you about what you really want to do. It's more about getting grades enough to be eligible and then playing to win, practicing, playing, everything that goes into it. It's a full-time job. Then when you're done, you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? And so I stayed in athletics for a while. In college athletics, I coached, I fundraised, I went the athletic director route for a few years. And ultimately just a little bit of, not trying to be too cliche, but a little bit of glass half empty. And I missed being constantly fulfilled like I was when I was playing. And I spent a lot of time internally thinking about it, praying about it, talking with people about it, and ultimately it just hit me. I had been I've been a color analyst for a lot of UCF radio basketball games, as well as some high school games. And I said, every time I'm preparing for a game or I'm doing a game, I'm just totally filled up with life, and it's a passion that it was an unrealized passion. And so I left a very, very comfortable job, a very well-paid job to go after this, and have felt 15 pounds lighter ever since I made the decision, have never looked back. And every moment, and Joel and I have talked about this, it can be a very frustrating business and industry, but my passion far outweighs any frustrations that kind of come into my path. So that's essentially where I'm at right now.
I love that. And I think it's important for our audience. A lot of internal communicators we have learned come from this world of journalism and working for print newspapers. And as you know, with the way print has gone, they have found themselves either laid off or out of jobs and have had to enter into this world, into corporate, into internal communication. So we often hear their passion for journalism trying to marry that in a world where they can still do that, and they can have expressed frustration with us with the changing trends. But it's interesting and inspiring to hear how you both have been able to still capitalize on your passion in this work. So I want to quickly go to Obi Toppin. And I remember someone, again, I can't remember which of you said, ain't no stopping Obi Toppin. Now, who said that?
All the credit to Mike. All the credit to Mike.
Yeah. I will definitely take all that credit.
Ain't no stoppin' Obi Toppin. Obi Toppin. If you haven't heard of this college basketball player turned NBA player, you need to watch this young man. Obi Toppin reminds me of internal communicators. He was an unsung hero, a player that despite his talent, not many people noticed. Now, he made himself eligible for the NBA, and through that experience, he was able to train with NBA players. Now, this year, he decided to go back to the University of Dayton and play for the Flyers. But during his NBA experience, he was able to find out where his weaknesses were, and he was able to grow. And grow did he. This guy crushed every record, and he came out on top. He was the Naismith Player of the Year. He won the Wooden Award. It goes on and on. But everyone took notice and saw his value. And I see this COVID-19 crisis as the internal communicator's NBA experience. It has shown where our weaknesses are. And for internal communicators now, we are center court, we are dunking, we are hitting threes, we are making the game-winning shots. You are the Obi Toppin, and now there ain't no stopping internal communicators. Now, this episode was about storytelling, but Joel and Mike, although they say they did not like math, they did want the tip-off to this game-winning episode to be about measurement. Measurement is how you grow professionally and personally, and it is how you stand out from the crowd. Let's jump in and listen. We have a lot of people in our audience that want to grow their careers. They might be new to internal comms. They've jumped into the waters, and this is an industry that is on the cusp of really tipping.
I'll take that from the standpoint of like measurement is everything from who's listening to who's watching. I mean, if we want to start like right here in a podcast note, I mean, most podcasts, you get 100% feedback on who's listening, when they're fast forwarding. I mean, that's a big thing in terms of advertising now, even down to, a radio broadcast that we do at Ball State. Like we get ratings, and if you're online, you can get ratings for different hours and different blocks of hours. And that's a big sales point toward monetizing what we do. If you're talking about digital media, when you put video on Twitter, when you put clips on Twitter, when you put promotional stuff on Instagram, from a broadcast standpoint, you can see who's watching it, how long they're watching it, when they're watching it, and that all goes toward monetizing what we're doing as well. And we live in such an era where, as much as we might want to say like, hey, I just want to show up and call the game, we know now who is watching, when they're watching, and how they're watching, and all of that drives precisely how we go about doing things differently or better going forward in the future. So it's just more to consider. And I even think in my own personal experience, like when I was in minor league baseball, I pitched a job to a team because I said, hey, you can monetize this in a certain way. Like if this team is on the radio, you will reach X number of people more, and you can spread brand identity, this percentage more. And these are ways that you can then monetize having a broadcast that you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't have a broadcast. And I remember like when I was like 24 years old, I wrote this whole proposal and pitched it to a team that I wound up working for in Bradenton, Florida. How much of that actually wound up being like, in that instance, like verifiable fact, I'm not sure. But it was one of those things where like when I put pen to paper, it made enough sense that I could pitch it, that it ended up creating a job for me. So in all of those senses, it's vital to what we do.
Right. We are we're an accessory, and hopefully a really good accessory and a storytelling arm of the game for that viewer who's turning on to watch, LaSalle versus Dayton. There isn't a Dayton fan. I mean, Sarah, you weren't. Boy, Mike O'Donnell and Joel, like they're calling the game. I got to watch this game. You're watching it because of Dayton, and then you ended up hearing us. So quantifying how you take all those numbers, and how does that actually benefit? Like, how do I grow my career with understanding? Am I getting more games? Am I getting less games in terms of broadcasting opportunities? Am I getting the same amount? What can I do differently to kind of set myself apart?
Setting yourself apart. I learned that internal communications had tremendous power within the UCF athletic department. Let's listen in as Mike talks about something we've all experienced: departments working in silos. I want you to hear this story of how the athletic director used internal communications and how it proved to be the game-winning formula for increased ticket sales.
When I worked at UCF, I was chief of staff in the athletics department for the athletic director at the time, Todd Stansberry, who's now the AD at Georgia Tech. When I started doing that, before he got there, there were a just a remarkable number of silos in the athletic department, right? And in a Division I UCF athletics department, you might have about 400 employees. It's a big chunk between coaches and staff and GAs and interns. And the thing that really kind of took me by surprise is when we did kind of just an internal communication on how's everybody doing. I mean, literally blanket statement. We would meet with different department heads and talk about, there was just this amazing disconnect to where everybody's walking on eggshells. The marketing department didn't have any relationship or know what was going on with the fundraising department. The fundraising department didn't know any marketing initiatives that were happening. You would think of any two, groups inside of an athletics department, that the marketing department and the fundraising department would have some kind of relationship. I mean, they go hand in hand. And then the ticket sales department wasn't even in necessarily the same building as the fundraising department or the marketing department. So you had all these silos that were supposed to accomplish, you had all these departments that were trying to accomplish one goal that not only didn't know each other very well personally, they were operating essentially on an island, and then you hope the result works out at the end. One of the things that I really respected that he did was the first thing he did, and this was a really hard organizational thing for me. As the athletic director, nobody does this. Literally, no, I've never heard of anybody doing this. He got there and he met with every single employee one-on-one for 15 minutes in the departments. I'm talking interns, grad assistants, associate ADs, ticket sales reps. He met with every single employee in the athletics department to understand their story and their frustration. And that was very difficult and took a long time, a really long time. I mean, it almost took 6 months to meet with everybody. I mean, you got to think, when you're an AD, I mean, Joel, you know this. I mean, your job is it's massive. It's massive. You're working 18 hours of the day.
Yeah.
And for him to do that was pretty spectacular. And not only did people move offices, but he actually would promote certain people in the department who were great internal communicators, because he knew that he could create stickiness within the department if he had 3 or 4 communicating leaders in that space. That it wasn't like tattletaling at all. It maybe could come off like that, but it was more like, hey, the ticket office is frustrated because of this situation and they need a better relationship with the marketing department. Well, he would then start creating more synergy just through A, meetings, and B, over communicating internally. The HR department essentially became the internal communicating department, in that the HR had more responsibilities in creating team building events, and also from literally having a pulse and relationship with everybody in the office, as to oppose of you just go to HR if you have a problem, or you just go to HR if you're not sure what to do with your benefits package, and so the best thing that he did was he recruited and sold some of the best relationship people in the office to give them more opportunity to grow relationships in the office. And the more empowerment he gave to the human resources department, you could just see everything click. You saw ticket sales went up, fundraising went up, coaches' relationships with the staff wasn't seamless, but it was just remarkably better than where it was. And the two things I take away is the empowerment that he gave to a lot of the internal communicators in the office proved to be a winning formula for that time, because it was in such siloed disarray. And that's something that I always, when you were first talking to me about it, that's something that I always draw back to, because of if you're able to show worth from a relationship standpoint, you can show numbers, that's great, but ultimately it does come down to not just communicating with people, but being able to receive a message and not convolute the message when you move it forward, understanding kind of the backstory and just kind of the ethos behind when someone's explaining a frustration. what's he or she really saying in that moment.
And now, in the spirit of storytelling, I want to jump in to get a word from our sponsor, but not in our typical way, in a storytelling way, because the story of Circle's founder is one you don't want to miss.
My name's Tarek Kamel. I'm the CEO and founder of Circle. So when I was 12, I took a summer camp on writing software and pretty much have been addicted to technology ever since. Well, the way my brain works is I love to solve problems, and I was serving on a school board, my kids' school board, and I was noticing a fundamental issue with disengaged parents and community members within our community. And it's not that they didn't care, it wasn't that they were apathetic, it was that they are just underwater. And so I really have a passion for public education in general. And I didn't like the fact that people were missing opportunities to get further engaged with what was going on with their kids' education. And so that's where I really started to analyze this problem of engagement. And then I spent probably 18 to 24 months just studying the science of engagement before I figured out what was the real core issue. Why were people disengaged?
So we'll jump back into Tarek's story later to learn what he uncovered, but I want to jump back into our episode with Mike and Joel. Don't worry, we'll come back to Tarek's story later. As internal communicators, yes, numbers are important, but to win the game, it is the compelling story behind the numbers. Let's lean in as Joel and Mike give us their play-by-play game plan to weave a great story. They share the importance of sharing the right numbers to fit a narrative and ultimately slam dunk the most important part of your story, the why.
Yeah, I just think if you're only telling a story from the numbers, which you have to in a lot of capacity, but if you're only telling a story from a numbers perspective, then you lose the human element, which is being human is what allows us to communicate effectively or ineffectively. So what's the story behind the numbers? And so if an internal communicator can look at the numbers and see, let's say if there's let's just take a negative situation. If that internal communicator can communicate the reason why by literally speaking with people inside of the frustrated space, inside of the space that's losing, and then communicating that in a constructive way up the chain, as opposed to saying the sales department sucks or the sales department isn't getting it done. Okay, well, is there a story behind the actual number? And being proactive in a sense, I think that's what ultimately gets people promoted and actually, you're able to move forward is you can understand the story why instead of just taking the number. Everybody benefits.
Yeah. So talk about both of you. How do you weave in storytelling into your broadcast? I mean, how do you prepare? Like how did you two prepare before the UD LaSalle game?
Reading a lot, virtually anything that you can find. I'm a self-professed connoisseur of Google. So it's digging up any article you can find on anything. And that's, basic things to then starting to researching people's hometowns and, where they went to high school and what ties they might have, anything that you can find that just might be something interesting that other people might not know. And it can be, paralysis by analysis, but you have to kind of find that balance of what is effective, what's worthwhile, while still digging deep. And then, we get there and we talk to people. And that's the biggest thing is looking a player in the eye and asking them how their season's gone and asking them about their backstory. I think the best nugget that Mike and I got that particular day was, Mike looked at Obi Toppin and asked about the Black Ops game he'd played in New York City, which is these famed NBA pickup games they play in the off season. And Obi was invited to come and shows up at the door, and they said he wasn't on the list, so he couldn't get in. And then he eventually got in, and that's kind of the day that made him famous because it went viral on YouTube when he's dunking over NBA guys. And that wasn't an anecdote that either of us had found anywhere else. We just got it because in 5 to 7 minutes, we took him down the right path to get him to give us an interesting nugget that we didn't know. So it's a collection of all of that and then organizing it in some sort of fashion that it's readily available to you in the right moment. Because timing is everything. Like as much information as you have, if you don't know when to use it, or if you're not prepared with it when the right moment comes, it's really for naught. So it's a lot of organizational skill and then a lot of number crunching too, and understanding what statistics mean, which ones matter, and which ones matter on the grand scale, but which ones are relevant to what you're looking at in that game in particular as well. And then how you can, bend numbers to fit a kind of narrative. Like, this team is really good defensively. How good are they defensively historically? What does that mean in the conference? Like, does the best defensive team always win this conference, or is this an offensive league? And how numbers and stats can paint a bigger picture. And when you put all that together, hopefully you've got some sort of canvas that you can paint with when the ball goes up.
Yeah, I think Joel hit it right on the head. Creating a narrative based off the numbers is so important for what we do. Joel has a lot harder job than I have. He's play-by-play. He's got to tell you what's going on right now, and then I get my job is to be the why guy. Now, a lot of times in this business, you don't get the why as much in a broadcast as I think maybe I would prefer. Like if Joel says number 15 throws it down to number 3 and he reverse layup. And then if all I say is that's a heck of a reverse layup, well, that's super lame. That contributes nothing to the broadcast. So I have number one, I have become obsessed with explaining the why. I don't do as good of a job as I'm not anywhere near where I want to be, but I'm just obsessed with kind of growing and explaining why. I mean, that's ultimately the story. Anybody could say, yeah, that's a really great dunk. Okay, how did he get open? Or why is he so athletic? Did he do something in the off season? And my process, I don't think will ever stop. My preparation process, I think it's always going to morph and grow and evolve. As it should, or else I'm just going to be stale. And one of the things, like, I put about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, I realized I was putting too much emphasis on numbers and stats in my notes. And I wasn't diving into the reason why those were so important. And so I've tried to morph my storytelling into being more, I guess, practical for the viewer. The stories are great. Joel is just such a good example of that Obi Toppin story. Like, you don't get that in an article. You don't get that in the game notes. You can't look at that on Dayton's website. So just making the extra effort and asking the question, the worst thing that you can have, even if it's a kind of a weird question, the worst thing that could happen is that you're just in the same place as you were before. But if you don't ask the question, you'll never know if you get that story. I actually hate talking to head coaches. Usually is you get nothing from head coaches, and I think Joel will attest to this.
Yeah, that's not false. Yeah.
yeah. Because they're so afraid of just something getting out or saying, they're always on edge. But if I can develop a relationship with the managers or the grad assistants, and they can tell me a story about a player who was up at 2 a.m. last night getting shots up because he hasn't been shooting well, that's a really cool story. Like a fan of Dayton would love to hear about the shooting guard that's in the gym at 2 o'clock in the morning getting shots up. So that's kind of where my focus usually lies.
Is there an example of kind of a powerful question that you've asked players that has elicited really good responses, or do you have any tips on how do you really how did you get that story out of Obi?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm taking notes what Joel's going to say now too. That's a great question.
Yeah. And the answer is really simple. It's why, or how, or like it's a one word. Like there are the question words: who, what, when, where, why, how. Literally, that is the best, most powerful question you can ever ask somebody. because it means you're listening. So you're engaged in a conversation with them and they say something, and the best thing you're ever going to respond with is why. And it goes back to, Mike was talking about, that was a great dunk. Well, why was it a great dunk? How did he get open? It's why and how. If somebody tells me, hey, pick whatever, my shot's gotten better in the off season. Why? It's always the question that follows the initial question is the most powerful one, because you're leading the person you're talking to. And this goes like if you're interviewing somebody, if you're doing a job interview, if you're talking in a meeting, if you're on a date, like the best thing you can do is lead that person down that path and let them continue telling the story they've already begun. If they're telling you about how impactful their grandfather is, like who's your basketball idol? Oh, my grandfather. Why? Well, he played for the 76ers, or like, my parents weren't home much when I was a kid, so he raised me. Whatever it is, if it's the question after the question that continues leading people down that path that will inevitably get you the best answer.
So I don't know about you, but I'm dying to hear from Tarek. I want to know the core issue as to why people are disengaged.
Fundamentally, it comes down to they're just underwater. There's so much content being thrown at individuals, whether you're a parent in a school district or you're an employee at a large organization. There's so much content and communication being directed at you, whether it's personally or professionally. It has become impossible for people to keep up. And when I realized that that was the core issue, then I looked at brands that were doing a great job of engaging me. So if you think Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and Spotify and Pandora, they're all doing the same thing. They're basically making you feel as though you're the only fill in the blank. Viewer, watcher, subscriber, whatever it is, they make you feel as though you're the only one. Everything is tailored to you, because if it's not, you will tune them out. I don't have time, I don't have the bandwidth for things that aren't relevant to me, because everyone's trying to grab my attention. So that fundamentally was the issue, and then subsequently the solution.
So remember the athletic director that Mike talked about? The one that met with each employee one-on-one? This is exactly what Tarek from Circle has built, but at scale. Let's see how this unfolded.
Really, it was an internal communicator that came to us and said, I would love to be able to deliver personalized experiences for our employees. It was a healthcare organization with 10,000 employees. And they said, can you help me? And I said, well, sure. The last time I worked in a large organization, it was SharePoint and Outlook. And this was 20 years ago. What are you doing today? And they said, SharePoint and Outlook. And so that's when it dawned on me that really the same advances in marketing have not translated internally. We don't treat our employees like we treat our customer. It's very different. So that was really the epiphany that there is a real opportunity to change how we think about treating our employees, and it should be no different than how we treat our customer.
Listen to the end if you want to hear the last part of Tarek's story, his solution that has been a game changer for internal communicators. So tell me, do you have a story of your most memorable game that you've broadcasted?
Well, the best thing I saw was Obi Toppin in the warm-up line. He puts on a NBA dunk contest in the warm-up line. That was pretty spectacular. I would say, there's one opportunity. This was last season. I walk out, and this was pretty cool. I think this is a great way to end the kind of the power of storytelling. So I walk out, and it's East Carolina versus South Florida, and I noticed that there's a young man that's on the East Carolina bench, and he's just kind of being consoled by one of the coaches, And I was like, yeah, boy, I hope he's okay. Literally just the thought, I hope he's okay. And about 5 minutes goes by, I turn around, and I noticed the guy's in tears, and I'm like, boy, oh my gosh, I hope everything's okay. And then I noticed something a little strange in that East Carolina players started coming out of the tunnel to warm up. And they're all wearing white t-shirts with a phrase on them. It was I, and then a red heart, and then it was a name underneath. And I was like, well, that's just kind of different. Usually you wear, it's a Nike or Adidas or Under Armour kind of warm-up t-shirt with your team's name or logo on it. It's pretty par for the course. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting and strange. And so I go up to one of the East Carolina staff members and I say, hey, what's going on? Everything seems it's just kind of different. Why are you guys wearing these t-shirts? And what is the is your teammate okay? And he says, well, actually, it was one of the graduate assistants, the guy that was really distraught. His wife, his mother was tomorrow going through serious treatment for life-threatening cancer. She was having surgery, and it was basically one of those last efforts to remove the cancer. She already gone through a lot of chemo before it was just time to say goodbye. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And I was just thinking, I'm like, I don't know. I guess I just try to be, what can I do to help? You almost feel like you feel so helpless, but you want to help. And I don't know this person. I don't know this team. I don't know anything. And then I went back about 30 seconds later. I literally made a U-turn. I went back and I said, hey, can we tell this story? Would he be okay? Would the graduate assistant be okay with us telling this story on air, in a positive light? Well wishes to his mom and family. And the reason why the graduate assistant was crying, because he had no idea that the staff and the players were going to wear those t-shirts in support of his mom. And so he just lost it when they walked out. I mean, just total waterfall crying. It was an incredibly classy gesture by East Carolina. And so I said, hey, check with the graduate, see if he's okay with telling the story. We would love to tell that story. And keep in mind, it was about 10 minutes before tip-off. And everything's in the can at that time. All the graphics, all the video, everything comes together at the last minute. And so I run over, I get the yes, and I run over to the truck, and I go into the producer and I said, look, man, I just took this picture. I was able to get a picture with the team and the t-shirts and the graduate assistant. I was like, you've got to get this in there. We have to do this for them. And he looks at me, and he was wonderfully frazzled. And he goes, all right, we'll make it work. Second time out of the game, we're going to make it work. I said, awesome, great. So we told the story, and it was really great. We felt good about it. And afterwards, one of the East Carolina staff members called me and was like, Mike, we are so thankful you did that. His entire family was in the hospital room with his mom, brothers, aunts, uncles, and they were watching the game. They were watching the game because they wanted to watch she wanted to watch her son's team, and they had no idea that story was happening. And it provided this temporary relief and happiness and joy that there were a lot of people that were learning about this woman's story. And so more people started asking the East Carolina fan base about her, their situation. And she got flowers and all this kind of stuff. And she ended up passing away 2 weeks after that game. And 2 weeks ago, I did an East Carolina game, and the graduate assistant that was of the son of the mother who passed away, I hadn't seen him for a year. He came up to me, and he gave me this bro hug kinda, and I was like, hey, yeah, how you doing? It's good to see you. And I didn't know his mom passed away. And I said, how's everything going? How are you doing? He goes, I just can't thank you enough for doing that. He goes, literally, he told me the whole story, and she ended up passing away 2 weeks later. But they used the video from that game at a part of her eulogy, and he opened up speaking about his mom, about that story that we told about what happened on that ESPN broadcast. And nobody's gonna fans of South Florida or the people watching the game, nobody's gonna remember that. But how often do you actually, people who you had no idea, like, I don't know this woman, I barely know this guy on the staff, I was able to provide, let me rephrase that, we were able to provide just some temporary relief and happiness, and just some small amount of joy in an otherwise kind of dark time. And him coming up to tell me what happened afterwards and how he used the story, it was like, I honestly was a little taken back. I didn't even know how to respond. Like, I was like saying thank you, but then I was almost ashamed of saying thank you because I felt like we didn't really do anything.
Yes, I didn't forget. I told you this would be a nail biter to the last second. Here's the ending to Tarek Kamil's story and how he fundamentally has changed the game for internal communicators. If you are running point guard for your team, you'll want to know more about what Tarek figured out.
And then we took it one step further. Why can't we connect those channels? Meaning, if you've consumed a piece of content on SharePoint, why would we send you that same piece of content in an email or make you look at something you've already engaged with on mobile? It doesn't make any sense. So one of the macro trends that we saw was that companies are adding more and more channels to deal with more and more diverse generations in the workforce. And as you add more and more channels, it's having an unintended consequence of creating more work for the comms team. That's one more channel I've got to post content to. And it's having the unintended consequence of creating more noise for the employee. Where did I see that? Was that in an email? Was that on our intranet? Was that in mobile? Was that in Teams? Was that in Slack? It's creating the exact same issue that we did with the consumer. I don't remember where I saw this. And it's even more impactful for the employee because this is really important information that they need to do their jobs successfully. So we can't just keep layering channels on. You're just making the problems worse unless you connect everything. And that's fundamentally what Circle is doing.
Circle is a proud sponsor of the Internal Comms Pro Collective. To learn more about Circle, visit circle.com. That's CERKL.com.
We're headed down to the final seconds of this episode, and this is the best part where Mike shares the exact play-by-play details of his storytelling game plan.
It's amazing what happens to where you become the centerfold for a growth period of a relationship between two employees or two department heads. You can really create a lot of significance for yourself as an employee if you're seen as that bridge maker. That always comes back positively.
So we always like to give our audience out of each episode kind of a cheat sheet or a checklist. Do you or Joel, with your process, do you have a template on how you craft the broadcast or the order of it?
I have a template for really kind of the nuts and bolts. So when you talk about stats, maybe player awards, each player's number, their correct pronunciation of their name, what class are they, what major are they, what they're, there's a deeper dive into the statistics of it. Then I do players individually first. Then you kind of go that macro route, and I go micro first and then macro. So I start players focused. I roll out from what's the main things that we got to say about the coaching. What's the main things we have to say about this team? Are they undefeated? Are they in the top 25? Are they struggling? And I also, so I guess the easiest way I would say is I always start right, at the micro approach first, and then it grows and it morphs into the macro of you start individually with each player, then the coaches, then the team, then the season outlook, and then the stories surrounding everything. So I may not even go into the storytelling aspect until a day or two after I make sure that all of the micro is correct, because I don't want to call someone a junior when they're a senior. I don't want to get their points wrong. I don't want to get their rebounding wrong. I don't want to get their free throw percentage wrong. So, you know, that template of individualizing kind of the micro first and then morphing out to the macro is usually what I go for. All the reading and research, right? It's all the micro for me is the computer based, all the Google that Joel talked about, and then once the micro is taken care of, the macro for me is can I find stories that explain the reason why, whether for a player or a team, why they're good, why they're bad, why they're struggling, why do they play this certain style, that kind of thing.
Okay. And is that something that you have templated it out that you can share a template of that? Because I think
Oh, sure.
okay.
Oh, sure.
I
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
love to
Happy
share
to.
that because I think that framing would work really well for an internal communicator as they start telling, all right, what's the accurate statistical information we have to get about the company, and then to broaden that out, all right, what's the horizon look like for where this business is going, and then to start telling those individual employee stories. I think that's such a great tip on from a color analyst of how they can get it organized, but also add that color that makes those moments and those stories so memorable, which then in the end increases and showcases the worth of the internal communicator.
Yeah. Happy to share.
Well, I say we scored on this episode. I can't wait to share their play-by-play templates with you. Now, we'll put all this in our beautifully inspired storytelling playbook that you can access for free on internalcommspro.com. And don't forget to tune in to our bi-weekly show coming out in May. We're launching our first ever Bloom series, and we'll be telling the stories of internal communicators who are in full bloom, and they'll be sharing their growth secrets with us. Remember, you're center court now. You're the game changer. You're the playmaker. You're the star we're cheering for.
Internal Comms Pro podcast is produced by Super Awesome Media. Our theme music is Hard Fought Victory by Purple Planet Music. Thank you for listening.